Hey, welcome to Vitalpoint Church Online. My name is Ron, and I'm the pastor of Vitalpoint Church, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today as we wrap up our series called Upside Down. We've been in this series looking at the teachings of Jesus through the lens of what is called the Beatitudes. It's found in the book in the New Testament called Matthew, and we've been unpacking these statements and taking a look at the truths that God is giving to us through the person of Jesus. I want to say this to you. If you are new to Vital Point Church, maybe this is your first experience, someone told you about it, you're sitting in a room or in your home watching this, whatever it might be, I would say to you, go back at the beginning of the series on our YouTube channel and start watching the other messages. It'll really help give some context to how Jesus ends the conversation. I've been spending a fair amount of time praying and seeking God as to how to wrap up this conversation today, because it's a little bit of a difficult way in which Jesus ends this conversation around the Beatitudes. See, one of the things that I've been thinking about as I think about the conclusion of the moment in which Jesus teaches, I've been thinking about a huddle. When Jesus sits down in the early part of Matthew chapter 5, he huddles his disciples close to him, and there's crowds that do gather around, and they're observing and listening as well. But there's a piece of this where it feels like a huddle. Now, over my life, I have been part of many sports teams. One of the things that I have loved over my lifetime as a teenager and as an adult is playing sports. I love being part of a team. I love getting that jersey. I love getting on the field or on the rink or whatever it is. I just love elements of that. Over the past 15 years or so, I have played soccer for the German Canadian club in London, Ontario, where I live. And one of the things that I love about it is part of the game and part of the aspect of being part of this team is what is called the huddle. It's the moment before the game. Like when the coach yells, "Bring it in, boys," and we all come in and we gather around, and the coach speaks and the captains speak, and oftentimes a game plan is laid out for us that really, truly only lasts about 5 minutes into the game, to be honest with you, because you just never know how it's going to go. But the coach will give, who's going to start, who's going to be on the bench. He talks about the positions and where we're going to play. Sometimes he even will say, okay, there's a player on the other team that we need to pay attention to. He's really fast, he's really quick, and he'll look at maybe another player or myself, and he'll sometimes say to me, "Hey, Rev, you're going to mark that player. Stay close to him, because if you don't, he's going to punish you," which means basically he's going to make you look stupid with the ball. And so there's a part of that role and responsibility. At the end of the huddle, we all look at each other and we go get him. Let's go out in the field and have a good time. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment what it'd be like if our coach actually ended the huddle a little bit different. What if our coach looked at every one of us and said, "Hey guys, just so you're aware, this game is going to be a tough one. It's not going to end well." And we're not talking about the score. He's actually talking about some of us are going to take it on the chin. Some of us are going to be bruised and broken. Some of us are going to have to be carried off the field. Some of us might even break bones, which I have. I've broken ribs playing soccer. If our coach ended the huddle like this, many of us would look at each other and probably come up with excuses as not to go onto the field, right? "Hey, coach, I'm going to sit on the bench to start the game. I just want to observe this game." Or maybe someone might say, "Hey, coach, I just got a text from my wife. The kids are sick. I got to go home." Like, nobody is going to end a huddle like that except Jesus. The reason why I have struggled so much with how to wrap this Upside Down series is because Jesus ends the conversation on the Beatitudes in a way that's not warm and fuzzy. In a way, many, I would assume, who were listening in this moment would look at each other and go, "Let's find another rabbi." What I want to do is, I've asked my friend Todd to read for us the Beatitudes starting in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. And when he gets to the end, I want you to listen to what he says. Take a listen.
Hi, my name is Todd, and I'll be reading Matthew 5, verses 1 to 12 from the Passion Translation. One day, Jesus saw a vast crowd of people gathering to hear him, so he went up on the slope of a hill and sat down. With his followers and disciples spread over the hillside, Jesus began to teach them. What happiness comes to you when you feel spiritual poverty, for theirs is the realm of heaven's kingdom. What delight comes to you when you wait upon the Lord? For you will find what you are longing for. What blessing comes to you when gentleness lives in you? For you will inherit the earth. How enriched you are when you crave righteousness, for you will be surrounded by fruitfulness. How satisfied you are when you demonstrate tender mercy, for tender mercy will be demonstrated to you. What bless you experience when your heart is pure, for then your eyes will be open to see more and more of God. How enriched you are when you bear the wounds of being prosecuted for doing what is right, for that is when you experience the realm of heaven's kingdom. How ecstatic you can be when people insult and prosecute you for speak all kinds of cruel lies about you because you love me. So leap for joy, since your heaven's reward is great, for you are being rejected the same way the prophets were before you.
You know, when I listen to the description of the Beatitudes from the Passion Translation, I connect it to this idea that we've been talking about for the series, is that it paints a picture of what God intends us to be and do within the context of the kingdom of heaven. We've talked about it from the realm of the authority and the responsibility of the relationship, the flow, the picture, the moving towards this beautiful thing. We've talked about the authority and the relationship of Jesus. It's been amazing. We've talked about comfort and mourning. We've talked about pursuing and thirsting for righteousness and poor in spirit and pure in heart and peace and merciful. He paints this picture that's so beautiful, but then he puts this last brush stroke on the picture and he says that there is going to be pain. There is going to be struggle. Did you catch it? I want to read it for you again, just in case you missed it. How enriched you are when you bear the wounds of being persecuted for doing what is right. For that is when you experience the realm of heaven's kingdom. How ecstatic you can be when people insult and persecute you and speak all kinds of cruel lies about you because of your love for me. So leap for joy, since your heavenly reward is great. For you are being rejected the same way the prophets were before you. The first 7 of the Beatitudes, we might pray, Jesus, may it be so. Number 8, not so much. Number 8, I don't know how many of us would actually pray for this to become part of our journey, to be part of our faith journey. Matter of fact, Jesus, out of all the Beatitudes, ends this one repeating it twice. Over and over again, he says this idea of being ecstatic and leaping for joy and overwhelmed with joy and all this, but through persecution. I mean, I wish Jesus would have chose let's search for peace. Let's be peacekeepers. I mean, that would be amazing if he said that one twice, but he actually steps into this moment and he says, you will be persecuted, you will be rejected. Twice he says it. What is Jesus actually doing here? How can we look at this from a 21st century, Western mindset? How does this apply to us? Well, it's important that we understand that Jesus bookends the Beatitudes with the phrase, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. This is a very important perspective and understanding how he's ending this, because he bookends it. He starts with kingdom of heaven and he ends with the kingdom of heaven. What we realize is that Jesus came to preach and to communicate and to teach about the kingdom of heaven, that the reality of God's fullness can be experienced in the present, that it's not only just something for the future, that through his death, through his life, and through his resurrection, we can experience the kingdom of heaven. When we understand this from Jesus' perspective and what he's teaching, we understand very clearly that there will be a clash of 2 worlds, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of this world. Anytime that you look at the word world within the context of the Bible, you can see it in the different spheres. We can look at the world from the context of the earth and the creation of earth. We can look at it through the atmosphere, the universe. But when you actually look at the world through the context of the biblical perspective, what we realize is that the world is actually describing for us The world that is in direct opposition to the control of God's order. That is an important distinction for us. That we look at the world through the lens that the world is in direct opposition to God's shalom. We talked about God's shalom last week, is God's peace, the depth of completeness and wholeness through the person of Jesus Christ. We must also understand that the world, from a Bible's perspective, is in direct opposition to what God is doing in your life, and it opposes any of the expression of God's kingdom that is developing within you and within me. That's critical to the conversation. That when we begin to see the kingdom of heaven, which Jesus has been describing through the Beatitudes, he's been painting this picture of poor in spirit and peace and humility, thirsting for right relatedness and all aspects of that. When you begin to see the kingdom of heaven grow and develop, then there runs in direct opposition to the kingdom of this world, because the kingdom of this world does not want the expression of the kingdom of heaven to be experienced. The world, not to be a downer, the world is not seeking your best interest. It is not cheering on the characteristics and qualities of God's kingdom. It's going to do everything it can to stop that movement. Now you might go, well, where is this all coming from? How do we understand this from a bigger picture perspective? There's a writer by the name of John. He describes this in John chapter 5, verses 18 and 19. It says this: "We know that God's children do not make a practice of sinning, for God's Son holds them securely, and the evil one cannot touch them." Okay? We're describing the description of the authority and the relationship and the power of being held in the Son's hand, in Jesus' hand. Verse 19. "We know that we are children of God, and that the world around us is under the control of the evil one." There's a dynamic that is happening around us that we must understand and have a reality check, that there's misery, that there's a perverseness, that there's a poverty, and the primary role of the evil one is to distinctly influence us through the patterns of this world that run in direct opposition, to steal away the things that are happening in our lives. Now, you might be listening to this and you might be thinking, whoa, hang on a second. I thought the Christian narrative was one of Jesus conquering sin and death and overcoming evil. The answer to that is yes and not yet. The Christian narrative is about Jesus being born, the Son of God being born. Out of God's love, the Son comes to this earth. The King becomes a baby. We're celebrating Christmas in a few weeks, the celebration of God with us in the flesh. He goes to a cross, dies and resurrected, and we would say, through the context of the narrative of the Christian faith, that he conquered sin and death. And it is true, he has. But the reality of this fullness of the kingdom of God and the fullness of the shalom that we talked about last week, the peace of God, is not in the fullness yet. It is coming when Jesus returns. So yes, it is true that Jesus has overcome sin and death, and that we no longer have to have that dictate our lives, but yet we can now fully understand that when he comes back again, he will bring that into full fruition, which is amazing. In the meantime, though, there is the battle between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth within the context of which we live. Matter of fact, there's this guy named the Apostle Paul that spoke about this in another section of the Bible, that he describes for us the battle that takes shape for us in our own journey. He says this in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, starts by saying a final word. He's writing to the church at Ephesus, and he says, "Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in the dark world, and against evil spirits in heavenly places." Like, I don't want to freak us out today, but the reality of the enemy is that the enemy's role and responsibility and primary focus is to oppress any of the work of God in our lives, in your life and in mine. And anytime someone begins to express that, there will be direct opposition of some sort that stands in the way. That's why the Apostle Paul says that we are to stand firm in the truth of who God is, that the armor in which we wear is the ability to fight against those things. Now, we must begin to bring it down into the context of how we live. How is this opposition fulfilling itself? Because Jesus talks very clearly that we will face persecution. What does this mean? Persecution in the Aramaic language means this: being rejected or intense forms of being rejected. That the disciples of Jesus, in the conclusion of the Beatitude conversation, is that they will face moments of rejection. They will face moments of intense abuse at times. Matter of fact, the Christian faith, worldwide, historically speaking, is still the number one faith that is at the high risk of imprisonment, trial, and execution. There's an organization called the World Watch List that most of the stats are run through when it comes to Christians being persecuted in intense ways around the world. November 1st, 2018 to October 31st, 2019, 260 million Christians experienced high level of persecution, 6% higher than the year before. 2,983 Christians lost their lives in faith-related issues. That is 8 per day on average. See, when Jesus talks about persecution, he's not talking about something just within the context of the day in which he's teaching. He's sitting on a hill in Matthew chapter 5, and he's got the disciples around. He's going, hey, guys and girls, just so you're aware, you are going to face persecution. And we can expose that through the Bible. We can see the different elements of persecution and how the early church faced it. But we can fast forward to today, and we realize that today there's still people who are being persecuted. I've personally met a man in India when I was traveling in 2014. I traveled in 2014 to India. I met this man that had been beaten for his conviction of who Jesus was in his life. He refused to deny Jesus, and he was beaten by a radical religious group. When we traveled and I spoke in 2014 around India, I was told that there was the potential of some of these radical religious people that could be in the crowd. I mean, that takes it at a whole other level coming from a Canadian context and speaking and preaching in India. The reality is that there are some in our world that will be beaten, that will be jailed, that will face some form of intense persecution for those who claim to follow Jesus. It is not something of the past. It is something of which we face even today. Now, in our Canadian context, if you're listening to this in a Canadian context and you're part of Vitalpoint Church, I mean, we really don't understand this completely. We don't understand the elements of this, but it is true that it is part of the journey of faith. Now that we are navigating through this and beginning to get some context and some feel and some vibes of what Jesus is talking about, we must begin to look through the lens of what he actually said. Because in the New Living Translation and in the Passion Translation as well, Jesus says that God blesses, or blessed are those who are persecuted for doing what? For doing right or righteousness. Now, what is fascinating about that is that word, right or righteousness, directs us to a person, and it directs us to Jesus. There's an element of understanding the persecution of Jesus being developed and grown in us and through us and out of our lives. This is what Jesus is talking about and directing us to. He's not talking about this. I mean, this is an important conversation. He's not talking about being arrogant about your faith. He's not talking about being condescending to those of a different faith. He's not talking about being a jerk. He's not talking about standing on the street corner and slurring hate and abuse to others. He's not talking about a self-righteousness. Jesus is saying that there's going to be those moments of being rejected. Those moments where you will face opposition when the rub of the kingdom of heaven in your life and the kingdom of this world come in contact with one another. It means at times when you have to stand up for truth in a way that reveals who Jesus is. Like right now, there's a real overwhelming sense that has been emerging over the past decade or so. It's taken a lot of steam and it's this idea that your best truth is your own truth. And we have to be careful with this in understanding some of the political correctness behind this that is sometimes a little bit more dangerous. And it sounds good on the surface, but when you begin to realize that you say your truth is your truth, then what follows with that is nobody can tell me what my truth is and nobody can tell me how to live my life. Well, when you begin to look at the life of Jesus and what he brings in is a truth that supersedes our own truth, that is influencing our lives from the outside, that brings life. And so how do we find ways to step into those moments to speak the truth of who Jesus is? Or maybe there's an element of what we're seeing in the cancel culture in the context in which we live. Cancel culture is very quick to just eject someone because they have a different belief system or a different thought or an idea that goes against what is popular. Or someone who fails or falls or has a broken moment, and we quickly want to reject them. The Christian faith would say, yes, there's consequences to our actions, absolutely. But what about the place at the table of conversation in the cancel culture that says, hey, what about grace? What about forgiveness? What about transformation? What about second chances? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's not consequences. But what about the truth that allows us to have a conversation around the ability to speak into someone's life that maybe they've expressed a sense of weakness or brokenness, but yet we can step in and go, whoa, I have the answer. I have someone who would extend hope and truth and grace to you. Or what about the moments in the workplace when someone is devaluing another human being because of their race, or because of their background, or because of a belief. And we step in and go, whoa, that person is valued because they're created in the image of God. See, so oftentimes it's easy just to let these moments go by, but we realize that we are called, if you're a follower of Jesus, you are called to be in this moment to express the upside down truths of who Jesus is, to turn things right side up. When someone risks those moments, when someone steps into those moments, there is the potential of being rejected. There is the potential of the persecution. And I love what Jesus even says. There's this element of living in a way that expresses the rightness of who God is and who Jesus is within his kingdom, that people would actually have to fabricate stories about you and lie about you. And I think that that's an incredible perspective about our lives, that there's a genuineness of who we are in our faith and the expression of our faith in the places in which we live. Now, I recognize that I give these contexts and I give some of the stats and I talk about some people that I've met, and the reality is that for you and me in this context, in the Canadian context, Western world in which we live in, we're not facing these types of things, but maybe we need to step back and ask ourselves something bigger. Maybe there's an important aspect of this that will reveal itself as we begin to understand what Jesus is talking about. Because Jesus says that when we have these moments, that we can leap for joy, that we can be ecstatic, enriched, and blessed, that we can rejoice in these moments. Why does Jesus say this? Why does Jesus direct us to this as he huddles us together at the conclusion of this Upside Down series? What is he saying? What he's saying is this, is that if you begin to face any sort of opposition, whatever it might be, in the simplicity of the world in which we live in right now, our own context, it means this. It means that the reality of the kingdom of heaven is taking shape in your life through the relationship with Jesus and the transformational supernatural work of the Holy Spirit in your life, which means this, that you are being marked more by the kingdom of heaven than you are by the kingdom of this world. And that when the kingdom of heaven is marked in your life, there is an element of understanding that you live upside down to turn things right side up in a way that reveals what it means to be truly human within the context of God's perspective in a relationship with Jesus. Jesus is talking about the reality of this kingdom being formed and shaped in us. So those moments when maybe you step into to speak some truth or to give some perspective, that the potential is there to maybe, to be treated differently or to not get the same perspective, or maybe there's a pushback. There's an element of understanding that you're beginning to see things differently, that your eyes and your ears are different. That's what I love about this moment, is that we can rejoice, we can leap for joy because it is more taking shape in us and through us as we live our lives upside down. There's a piece of this that I found interesting. I was reflecting on this as I was thinking about my own journey of faith. I grew up in New Brunswick, and I grew up right on the campus of a Bible college, right on a Bible college campus. And in high school, the bus that I had to ride every day would pick us up in front of the Bible college and drop us off in front of the Bible college. And what I found interesting is I was reflecting on this, is that there were moments when we were dropped off at the end of the day that there were teenagers on the bus that would shout names at us. They would call us Bible thumpers and a bunch of other names. What I thought in that moment is that that's not persecution. It was only the proximity and where the bus stopped and getting off in front of the Bible college. Because the truth is that my life didn't reflect anything of the kingdom of heaven at that time. That my relationship with Jesus wasn't a priority. So my life did not reflect anything like that. But I thought about that even now. As I grow and develop in my faith, and as you do the same, as you begin to lean in and process what does it mean to follow Jesus within the context of the Beatitudes and the upside-down perspective, is that the more it takes shape inside of you, the more you will look less like the things of this world. You'll be marked by mercy. You'll be marked by pure of heart. You'll be marked by peace. You'll be marked by mourning. You'll be marked by the pursuit of thirsting for right relatedness in this world in which you live, within your own life. I mean, think about that. The truth of that. The power of that. That you can leap for joy. You can be enriched by that. But then Jesus says something else that drives it even deeper and gives us a greater connectedness. He says this, that in the process of being persecuted, you will be in the realm and in the community and context of the prophets that have gone before you. See, it is so easy to see our faith through the lens of our individual lives. It's so easy to do that. We talk about our personal time with God in the morning reading. We talk about our personal prayer time that we do. And then we talk about going to churches, and we talk about it from an individual perspective. But the reality of the kingdom of heaven is that there's a connectedness beyond ourselves and of those who have gone before us. There's a verse in Hebrews chapter 12 that the first part of it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, and it goes on to say, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. Like, I don't know if you've thought about your faith through this lens before, but your life is surrounded by a cloud of witnesses that have gone before you. And as those moments arise in your life where you're not sure if you should step in or not, they are cheering from the stands of your life saying, I gave my life in order for you to live out faith in the context in which you live. They're cheering for you and they're cheering for me. Jesus ends the Beatitudes in a way that makes us feel uncomfortable, but yet I am convinced that Jesus is pushing us to this place where he's saying, I don't want simply to have habitual churchgoers as part of my disciples. I want those who are willing to step into those moments to be shaped and formed by the kingdom of heaven through the relationship of Jesus. And in those moments, there will be a rub, there will be tension, but that's okay. That is evidence and proof of the life change and transformation and the work of the Spirit in your life. As we bring this series to a close, I want to ask you one thing. Will you live upside down to turn things right side up? If you're part of Vital Point Church, if you're at the extension of Vital Point Church, and maybe you're not even a follower of Jesus yet, you're not even sure about Jesus, faith in church and all that, I want to say this to you. Today, it is possible that God is asking you today to live upside down. That He's calling you right now. He's nudging you. You feel that little nudge in your back to say, will you step into this moment? And no, you may not have books written about you. No, you may not have your name in lights. No, you may not have, lots of people pat you on the shoulder and say, way to go, you gave it for Jesus. No, it might be in the simplicity of the everyday that He's calling you and me into the space to live upside down, to turn things right side up. We live in a time where people are searching for hope. We live in a time where people feel that their lives are falling apart in the midst of the uncertainty. And we, as God's people, can step into this moment and allow Him to shape and form and mold us to be upside down, to turn things right side up in the relationship with Him. May it be so. May it be part of who we are. May our lives be marked by this.